We're a little more relaxed in Texas, I think, maybe, right? Maybe. Allahu alam. Okay, so let me start off by giving you some of the contours of what I wanted to speak about, because I know what was mentioned. He said a lot, and perhaps you got maybe 10, 20% of that. In essence, what inshallah we're going to be talking about tonight is we're going to be looking at the concept of beauty. Now, if you know my own background, because my area of speciality is theophilosophy, someone may think, well, okay, why beauty? It doesn't really seem like a good fit. I mean, aren't you into logical arguments and debate, munadharat and things like that? And beauty just doesn't really seem to mix. Jazakallah khair. Oh, really? Oh, dear. Okay. So we had some books on the Sapiens table outside. I think someone took them at their leisure, but those were not for free. So if you have, please contact Brother Abdullah. Okay. So as I was saying, so people may, they ask, like, why are you worried about beauty? What's the point? So let me start off with a certain hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this hadith, and if you were here in the khutbah this morning, it's a hadith related to the end times. What we call, hadith that are related to end times. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "La taqumu sa'ah," that the hour will not be established hatta, until, and he gives a number of signs. One of the signs he gives, he says, hatta yuqbad al-ilm, until knowledge is lifted. This is the first sign. And then he continues, and he says that yuqbad al-ilm, and the increase in zalazil, earthquakes. وَيَتَقَارَبَ الزَّمَانِ, and the bringing close of time. وَتَظْهَرُ الْفِتَنِ, and the manifestation of trials and tribulations. And then he says, وَيَكْثِرُ الْحَرْجِ, and the increase in killing. وَهُوَ الْقَتْلُ الْقَتْلُ أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. Now, why I'm starting with this particular hadith? Because if you really think about it, it's almost like a summary of the modern world that we live in. Why? Because the first thing he mentions is yuqbad al-ilm. It is the lifting of knowledge. How is knowledge lifted? We know from other narrations, the Prophet ﷺ tells us, it is by bimautul ulama wa kathratul juhala. It is by the death of scholars. That's not the focal point. And the increase and proliferation of juhala, coming from the word jahal. You guys know what jahal is, right? Jahil, ayam jahiliya. Most people, when they think of this term, they think of it in terms of someone who doesn't have knowledge. So when it's translated as ignorance or being ignorant. But there's another antonym to this word, right? There's another opposite to this word. It isn't just the opposite of it isn't just ilm, but it's also hilm. Which means you're not letting someone push your buttons. Being disquieted, in other words. So if you think about it, we talk about ayam jahiliya, the days of ignorance, right? That's how we translate it. It wasn't the fact that there wasn't just knowledge, but in fact there was this predisposition that if you were to say something about someone's, father, mother, whatever it might be, tribes would go to war for generations. It was a lack of hilm. So when the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning the death of scholars and the proliferation, the increase of juhala, what I think of, what comes to my mind at least, is if you think about where most people get their knowledge, and here I'm talking about Islamic knowledge, in the contemporary world that we live in, I would say many, many, many people would turn on YouTube and start looking at the various lectures and so on and so forth. Now, with all deference to people on YouTube, many of the influencers that are out there, they come from positions of, let's say, a lack of knowledge. They haven't really studied at the feet of ulama, right? And this disconnect that you find in the modern world is very profound. Because when you're studying with someone, when you share a physical space, when you have suhbah, you're not only taking in information, you're taking in the character and the essence of the person that's teaching you. And so what you find is that the proliferation of juhala, you're finding the manifestation of that. A lot of the people, and not everyone, but who are the ones that have the most views, the most hits? That, it is those influencers that are the most exciting. And what is the thing that's most exciting? The thing that is related to jahiliyyah, right? It's about conflict. It's about, this person said this, and this person, I'm going to do a refutation video, and so on and so on and so forth. Those are the ones that are getting hits. And so the first sign that the Prophet ﷺ mentions is about the lifting of knowledge. Here we're talking about real knowledge. So let me give an example, because I don't want to just speak in hyperbole here. When I say real knowledge, there's a concept of abstract knowledge. Like I can tell you about something. There's a difference between me telling you about something and you getting the information and you becoming that. It becomes your state of being. All right, so I'll give you an example. So I do not have a six-pack. I know it's a big shocker, right? But the thing is, I could probably outline for you how to get one. I could tell you the exact diet you should follow. I could tell you about calories. I could tell you what's better, HIIT training or steady state, right? And I could tell you that this is the path where you would be able to get a ripped physique. But the reality is, that's just abstract information until it becomes part of you, until you actually act upon it, until it becomes part and parcel of who you are. So there's a difference between abstract facts and real knowledge. And that real knowledge, part of that is having proximity, having sohbah, having a relationship with the one that's teaching you. Right now, if you think about, how lectures happen, there's a bit of a distance. You don't really have a relationship with that person per se. And what you have is their persona rather than their person. Okay. Then the Prophet ﷺ says that the increase in earthquakes, that's something that I think we all can see, right? Whether we're looking at Turkey, whether we're looking at Morocco, and so on. And so across the world, there are earthquakes that they weren't like before. So for those of you who are my age or older, we don't really remember hearing about earthquakes to the degree that we hear about them today. But here's the one that's very interesting. وَيَتَقَارَبَ الزَّمَانِ. It is the quickening of time. Now I'm going to hold off on that, okay? But I do want you to think about something. For those of you who have come from other countries, and you go back to visit those countries, do you ever feel that things go at a slower pace when you go back home? Like when you come here, it's like time is just going really fast. And yet, when you go back home, it's like things are a bit slower. People are a little bit more, things are just, the time seems to be moving at a slower rate. And we give all sorts of excuses, right? They're just lazy people. They don't want to get up in the morning and do work. In America, we work hard, right? To a detriment. Anyway, so why is that? Why is the phenomena so different that it's palpable, you can feel it, but how do we understand it? So I'm going to return to that in a minute, bi'ithnillah. The one I wanted to look at is تظهر الفتن, the manifestation of trials and tribulations. And it's interesting that the Prophet ﷺ uses the word tadhar. Manifestation is how we translate it. But this word relates to dhahar, which means the back. Now why is that important? Because when you're translating something that's a dhahir, or something that's there, we translate it as that which becomes apparent, or that which is apparent. But it actually has a deeper significance. Why? Because if you think about this term, like let's say it refers to the back of an animal. Why does it refer to that which becomes manifest, or that which is the most obvious? Is because if you were to ride the back of an animal, you'd be taller than everyone else. Like back when they used to ride camels and things like that, in certain parts of the world, you'd find that when they would come in, they would be at the highest point, so they are clearly seen by everyone. All right? So when something is manifest, you can clearly see it. But there's another subtle dimension here. In order to ride the back of an animal, you have to subjugate the animal. You can't just let it subjugate you. That's why you're riding it. You're able to take control of it. So when the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning that there's a manifestation, these will become apparent, it's not just, hey, look, here they are. You've got all of these issues and problems. You've got transgenderism and liberalism and feminism, all these things. They're out there. No, rather, they're not just manifest, but they've now become, basically, they're able to subjugate our own worldview. They have an impact on how we understand what is truth and what is falsehood. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Okay? And then the increase in killing. Now, when you think about the world that we live in, there's commentators that say that we're living in a post-truth world. Because when we think about how we take in information, and you think about, all right, well, how can I trust information? The reality is that the information that you're taking in, it's very difficult to trust it. And that's why, anyone that's been on the internet or whatever, social media, whatever it is, now we tend to be a little more careful hopefully we're a little more careful when we're sharing things. We want to verify, did this actually happen, didn't happen? Because we're living in a time where you have things like artificial intelligence that can take a 3-second clip of your voice and construct an entire conversation out of it. And I'm not making this up. In fact, there's a company in the Silicon Valley that's working on an app. And I want you to think about this for a second. This app will allow the person to communicate with loved ones who have died. They need 3 seconds of their voice, and they can comb the entire internet for their Instagram posts, their Facebook posts, whatever information that's out there, and construct a personality so that you could pick up the phone and start talking to your mother who passed away 2 years ago. Hey, Mom, how's it going? You remember when we went to Disney World that one summer, and you're literally talking to your mom. What sort of cognitive and psycho-spiritual impact will that have on the human being? But guess what? That's not your mom. But you're in this type of reality which you assume it is. So the world that we live in is one that how do you now ascertain what is true and what is false? It's actually become quite the challenge. And all of this has a lot to do with the fact that you and I are not in control of information. When you are now surfing through YouTube or you're going through YouTube, all of that content is curated for you. It's chosen for you. It's trying to take you down a rabbit's hole where you click from one to the next and next. Why? Because what's important is engagement. Your engagement is what's being sold. If you're maximally engaged, that's exactly what they want. The problem is that if it's just based on content that's curated for whatever you're searching, that's a limitation. It means you can't be exposed to other realities, other vantage points, and so on and so forth, even though you think you may be. All right. So, and there's a statistic here. I don't think we have the slides here. They said that accurate stories rarely reach more than 1,000 people, yet the most prominent false news items routinely reach between 1,000 and 100,000 people in terms of how false news spread. All right. So here's my thesis for tonight. We have this issue that we live in a world where information, truth, reality is now all coming undone. How are we supposed to engage in such a world? How are we supposed to figure out what is true and what is not true? So my thesis for tonight is that the greater your exposure to beauty, and I'm going to make a claim, natural beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as truth. That is the central thesis for tonight. Okay? All right. So again, the greater your exposure to beauty, natural beauty, or let's say Quranic beauty as well, that's not part of the presentation, but that's part of the thesis as well. The greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. All right. So, why do I believe this is true? Because natural beauty, when you're exposed to it, it facilitates awe. It facilitates the feeling of awe, which leads to a higher cognition, a higher state of thinking. You're able to think about things better, and a decrease in your ego. And both of these are going to be very important. So again, your exposure to natural beauty is going to lead to increased cognition, decreased ego. And that is how you're able to see truth as truth, right? For those of you who know, there's a very famous hadith, very famous dua from Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And he says, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa wa razukna ittiba' wa arina al-batila batila wa razukna ijtinaba. Oh Allah, show me truth as truth and make me follow it. And show me falsehood as falsehood and allow me to stay away from it. So this is essentially what we're talking about. Okay. So, exposure to natural beauty, just so I'm hammering this point home, can help us to decrease cognitive biases. It'll help you think better. Exposure to natural beauty can help us decrease our ego. All right, let's start with ourselves. Now, I don't have the slide up there, but can we trust ourselves? This is my first question. So there's a certain psychological experiment that's done when it comes to vision. And so what it is it's basically these two lines. Like I said, if we had the slides, I could show you. It's these two lines, and they're like two arrows that have been put together. Okay, so the line looks like this, and two lines going up, and the same line or a line similar with the two lines going out. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I can try to show you. Anyways, it looks like that, if you can actually see that. All right? Okay. So with these lines, and this is known as the Franz Müller-Lyer experiment. What they did is, when you look at these lines, and people were asked, are the lines in the middle the same length? What you found is that, in the experiments that they did, 83% of the people saw the lines as different lengths. Okay? That's how they saw it. That's how they perceived it. Now, this experiment was first done in the 1960s. And and social scientists and psychologists and so on were curious, rather social psychologists were curious, why is it that this illusion, that 83% of the people saw it and the rest didn't, is this true for everyone around the world? So they took this same experiment and they exposed two tribes in Africa, the Suku tribe in northern Angola and the Biti tribe in the Ivory Coast. When they exposed these two tribes to the same experiment, they saw that almost 100% did not see the optical illusion. So this was a bit strange. Like, why is it that you had a certain group of people that saw the optical illusion and this group of people that did not see the optical illusion? Why is it? And so what they found is the people that were able to see the optical illusion were weird. Now, I don't mean they were weird as in we understand weird. It's actually an acronym, right? So it's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So in other words, if you live in the Western world and you're exposed to life in the Western world, right, or your country is exposed to life in the Western world, you would see the optical illusion. Well, why is that? Because what they found, the difference between the two communities, is where they, or their spaces of existence, where they lived, where they worked, were dramatically different. Why? Because in the modern world, most of the structures you're exposed to are relatively angular and straight. Even this building here, you look, there's corners everywhere. And this is, by and large, a mark of the Western world. Now, what does that do? What it does is, it gives you a certain idea of depth perception. Okay? Because you're used to angular walls and things, and that gives you, you optically look at this, and it looks like, okay, this area is deeper than this one, therefore this line would be greater than this one. Those two tribes, when you looked at what their housing was like, it was all much more natural and much more in tune with the natural world, structures that were more round and more like the natural world. So for instance, their huts would be round. There were no angles. They would, Allahu Akbar, there we go. Oh, well, maybe not. Okay, so their structures would be more round. They would be more like the natural world. All right, so it looks like we have the slides up, man. I don't know who's on that over there. No one. Okay, I'm talking to a ghost. Like I said, truth is relative. No, I'm kidding. All right. So once the slides come up, I'll show you some pictures. So what they found is that this difference is based upon where a person lives, literally. A person who lives as part of the natural world was able to see beyond it because their depth perception was very different. Okay, now, if that's the case, if we have some trouble because of our own environment, in other words, the environment you find yourself in can have an impact on your cognition. Just the environment that you live in, okay? So if we can't really trust ourselves 100%, can we trust others? Because one of the aspects of what we call epistemology, how do we know what we know, it's not that we just trust information, only the information that I know. Most of the information we have comes from testimonial knowledge. Most of what you know comes from the say-so of somebody else. And what happens is you're able to take on, or you're able to extend your epistemic domain. What I mean is, yeah.
Just let him know which slide he should be on, and then whenever you need to switch it, just let him.
Oh, it's just leave the phone on?
Yeah, just leave the phone on.
Okay. Hey, Abdullah. All right. Keep going. Keep going. All right. Keep going. One more. All right, wait, stop there. So that's what I was talking about, depth perception. Right? So you guys can see that the angular structure... Actually, can you go back a few? One, two, stop, right there. One more. That was the original experiment. So I don't know how many of you can see it, but many of you may be looking at it and saying, okay, the lines in the middle, one is longer than the other. When in fact, next slide. When in fact, they're same. Next slide. All right, all right, next slide. All right, that's the depth perception. One more. All right, those were some of the housing that we found in some of the tribes we were speaking about. You notice how more in tune with the natural world they are, less angular that they are, and so on. All right, keep going. One more. All right, wait, go back one. So what you'll find, and this is, I thought was very interesting, is that what we see is that in the pre-modern world, the architecture that is by and large found, right, whether we're talking about pre-modern Christendom or the pre-modern Muslim world, is that there is a lot more integration with the natural world. Whereas modernity now takes a very utilitarian understanding of the world, in the sense that we want to maximize productivity, so your office space, your home space, even some masajid, you'll find that their focus is utility, maximizing productivity. And therefore, structures are angular, structures are, a lot more drab. Like that's why they make offices so drab, right? And cold. Anyway, and of course we're living in a postmodern world. So that's just another lecture for another night. But anyways. All right, next slide. All right, so as I was saying, if we can't trust ourselves, can we trust others? Because the reality is most of what we know doesn't come from our own kind of experimentation. It comes from the say-so of others. Like if I ask people here, is the world round? What do you guys think? How many people believe the world is round? Okay. How many believe it's flat? I always want to see if there's anyone that's... Nobody? Come on, man. Okay. All right. How do you know that? How do you know the world is round? How do you know it's round, man? You don't know, or you do know? You do. Okay, how do you know that? Jazakallah khair. Because the earth is round. But why? How do you know that? How do you know that?
Someone told us.
Thank you. Someone told us, right? How many people have ventured to outer space and seen the earth? Yeah, nobody. But everyone in this room knows the earth is round. Do you know that firsthand? No, you don't. Right? You know that firsthand? How? Wait. The eclipse. So by the way of the eclipse, you know the earth is round. How? Okay, but that doesn't mean anything, man. When you say eclipse and shape, what am I supposed to do with that? Okay, wait. How do you know that? You can see the shadow of all of that? No. What you're telling me right now, you're saying the shadow and this and that. Look, I can see an eclipse. Everything you said in addition to that, how do you know that? Yes, that's exactly my point. In other words, testimonial knowledge is fundamental to epistemology, is fundamental to what you know about reality. You are dependent upon other people and their testimony, right? If I asked all of you, do you believe your mother is your mother? How many people would say yes? Yeah, I should be seeing everyone's hand. There's problems if we're in doubt about our mothers being our mother, right? Now the question is, how do you know that? Because you were told, right? Who's going to venture out and be like, but I can do a DNA test? Anyone want to give that one a shot? Because I love it when people do that. Please, someone, tell me. Right? Because the next question will be what? How do you know about the DNA test? You send your blood off somewhere and the results come. How do you know that those results are what they are? It's someone telling you. So fundamental to what we know is the say-so, knowledge from the say-so of others. Now, just as a side benefit, when people start knocking hadith literature, I want you to remember this. If most of what we know comes from the say-so of others, that is in every domain. It's not just in your day-to-day, workings and goings about. It is also true in science. No one does all the experiments themselves, do they? Of course not. They have to rely on papers and research, quote-unquote, from other people. You are reliant upon that. Here's the difference. Those, let's say, studies that have been done, how can we tell about biases? Maybe they're peer-reviewed. Who are the peers? What is their background? Are they honest people? Are they family people? How do we know? In fact, when you compare hadith methodology to any other system of testimony, you will find that it falls flat. And most of what we know comes from testimony. Anyway, that's just a side point. So, can we trust others? Well, we have to trust others in a certain degree. So, this is a nice quote from Elizabeth Fricker. She's a philosopher out of Oxford, I believe. It says, it should be immediately obvious that when the conditions of modern life, we rely hugely on the epistemic and practical skills of others. For example, I allow my car mechanic to find out what the fault is with my car when it won't start, and then to fix it for me, and one relies on one's doctor to use information from symptoms and medical tests to diagnose what is wrong with one, and then prescribe an appropriate treatment. You cannot know everything about every domain. So therefore, your epistemic boundaries, your epistemic domain is extended by knowledge from other people, right? And I think the example is good. If you go to a mechanic, you're going to a mechanic because you don't know how cars work, right? You're going to a doctor because you don't have that knowledge of medicine. And you can apply that to different domains. But here's the thing. We said that there's issues when it comes to trusting ourselves, right? We talked about optics and things like that. Now, when we talk about trusting others, I want to kind of tease that out a little bit. How many people know what this is? Actually, next slide, please. I keep thinking I'm working it here. Yes. What is that? Earth. All right. Anybody else? Map. That's the answer I was looking for. All right. Now, this is a map. This is a map that we are brought up with. We're in school. We use all the time. This map, what I think is really fascinating, and I'm going to go back to the hadith now. You remember, as we were reciting in the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ said that the hour will not be established, right? Until يَتَقَارَبَ الزَّمَانِ. That time is brought close. It happens in a hurried fashion. I want you to think about this part of our presentation in relation to that. How so? Because you see, this map that you're looking at, this map that all of us think about, this is a type of technology. Yes, it's a rudimentary technology. In other words, it's assisting you with direction and space. The thing is, before the advent of maps, when you wanted to know where you were in the world, it was something that was a lot more organic and natural. Because you were where you were. You walked where you walked. When you wanted to have directions, it was basically based upon your actual, real, ontologically real, spatial reality. But once you have the advent of a map, now, instead of you directly understanding where you are, literally, now the map has an impact on where you feel that you are. Because now you're looking at in relation to the map. Everyone with me? I haven't lost everyone, have I? Right? So the way that this rudimentary technology, the effect that it has cognitively, is that it now kind of dictates where you think you are. All right? That's the effect of a rudimentary map. Is the question? I haven't even gotten to the point yet.
Isn't it true that there was a time when the map was upside down?
Yeah, man, you're taking my lecture, man. That's exactly my next point. Jazakallah khair. You been to this lecture before? No? Okay, all right. Okay, so as our brother was saying, that even this map that has, when we think about where we are in the world, that has an impact on where we think we are in the world, how do we qualify it as being true? Because the reality is that the map is based upon the one who made the map. Okay? These directions that you see, with north being up and south being down, North America being on top and South America being down, there was a time, or there was a map maker that I mentioned in the khutbah today, Muhammad al-Idrisi, 12th century cartographer, whose map looked very different. In the sense that Africa was on top and Europe was on bottom. Well, why was that? Well, here's why. The map we use today is a map based on Ptolemy's original map. Okay? The map that, actually, next slide. Sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's a sample of one of the maps he made. Okay. When you see this map, so he draws Africa on top and Europe on the bottom. The European continent on the bottom. Ptolemy draws the map like we see it today. All right. What was the motivation to do so? Because you see, for Ptolemy, when he was drawing the map, for him, the dominant world view was that of Europe at the time. For Muhammad al-Idrisi, rahimahullah ta'ala, his dominant world view was Islam. So based on one's world view, they're drawing the map. What is dominant? And what is dominant is up. And what is subjugated is down, in general. It's a very rudimentary, kind of simple way of looking at it. But that's how maps were constructed. Now the reality is, next slide please. If you were to go to outer space, is Europe on top or is it on bottom? Is Africa on top or is it on bottom? In fact, there is no sort of real understanding of what's on top and what's on bottom. It's just totally based on the map maker. Now what's even more interesting is that they did studies to find out what sort of effect does cardinal direction have. Next slide. What sort of effect does cardinal direction have on practical things in life? So they looked at moving companies, all right? People that you hire to move your stuff. And they said that on average, movers in the United States will charge on average $250 more going from south to north rather than going from north to south. Why? Because the point is that that's not based on some sort of extra effort, but we perceive extra effort. Because going from south to north seems like we're going uphill. It seems harder, right? Even though cardinal direction is not based on effort at all. But because of that feeling of seeming when you go down to up, because of that effort that you perceive, they actually capitalize on that. Movers will do that and charge you on average $250 more going from south to north and north to south, right? When in reality, there is no sort of which one is true. Okay? Now what does this have to do with time? This is another side benefit point. When the Prophet ﷺ mentions يَتَقَارَبَ الزَّمَانِ, the same way that maps have an impact on how you perceive your spatial reality, right? It is the same way that clocks initially had an impact on how you perceive time. Because before you had the advent of clocks, right? Clocks as we know it today, Your understanding of time was rooted in the natural world. It was very organic. It was very natural. It was in tune with the natural world. But as soon as you start to now superimpose a clock, now you're dividing up time into hours, minutes, seconds, and so on. And when you divide up time like that, this facilitates productivity more than how we understand time. And this is why, just another side note to the side note, when you look at the Quran, you find that there's different words for time. So for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions dahr, right? That هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ هِينَ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. Was there not a time, the word that Allah uses here, dahr, that the human being was something not mentioned? Here's the thing. Let's say 200 years ago, all of us sitting here, were not a thing mentioned. There was something else here. Maybe this land, there was something else. There was still the time, what in philosophy is called absolute time. But there's no conscious being in this space to measure the time. That is dahr. This is why even the Prophet ﷺ says, "La tasubbu dahr, fa inna Allah huwa dahr." Do not curse time, this absolute time, because Allah is dahr. Okay? Compare that to asr. What does Allah say about asr? He says, "Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr." By this time, but what time is this? This is the one where you have a conscious human being that's clocking things and looking at time passing. And what does Allah say about that human being? He's in a state of loss. Because time ticking like that is very different than just absolute time, whether you are there or not. These are two different realities. So when the Prophet ﷺ says, يَتَقَارَبَ الزَّمَانِ, you have time that is now moving faster because of how you perceive it. Just like the map has an impact. The clock and your phone and so on, how you perceive time has an impact. Okay. So, that being the case, and by the way, with maps, I always say that it's even become more exacerbated. Why? Because now you not only have maps, but you have things like Google Maps. So it's not only giving you an understanding of your reality of where you are, but it's also telling you, submit, right? Make a left, make a right, go here, go down the street in 500 yards, make a left, and you say, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا, right? We hear and we obey. Yeah. Anyway, so if you can't trust yourself 100%, you cannot trust others, because remember, we're saying that knowledge, as we're now taking it from others, that also is not trustworthy. All right? Who can you trust? Now, I want to remind us of the central thesis one more time, because I don't want this just to go off track. Next slide, please. The greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. If we understand that there are cognitive limitations that human beings have, and that truth now, especially in the modern world we live in, becomes something that's, almost difficult to grasp in certain occasions, then my thesis here is that the more you are engaged with the natural world, in beauty specifically, the phenomena of how you experience beauty, the greater you'll be able to recognize truth, as it really is. That's the central thesis. And by the way, when you think about the Sharia, what's phenomenal about it is that it is constantly pushing you back to the natural world. Like most of us, when we're going to now decide what time is Salah, how do we do it? It's usually right? It's on this device. But if you open a classical book of fiqh, how are you supposed to determine the time of Salah? Let's see, we have students here, we have adults, we have the Adams community. See how strong you are in your fiqh. How do you determine Salah times classically? The sun. And the sun, obviously, is a natural phenomenon, right? This is now you connecting in a way that is, in a sense, that is more real, right? And it's very different than a clock or a watch that goes off like an alarm. The phenomenon is very different because now you actually have to look up and see when Salah timings are, okay? And many acts within the Sharia are like this. There's a very interesting book called Will My Cat Eat My Eyes Out? It's by Kathleen Doty. She's a mortician. You guys know what morticians are? Anyone who knows what you guys know what morticians are? All right, so a mortician is someone that when someone dies, they kind of dress up the body, right? So that people can come view the body, so they put on the suit and the tie or whatever, and they wax it up, and so people can see the dead body, when people come to the funerals. So she writes a book called Will My Cat Eat My Eyes Out? And it's a very odd title, right? But what she says in the book, she says that Americans are the most death illiterate people on the planet. Even when it comes to words that we use when someone dies, we would never go to someone. It would seem very uncouth and rude to tell someone, hey man, I heard your dad died. No, we don't, generally it's not nice. You probably say something like, I heard your father passed away. I heard he passed on. I heard he's no longer with us. So she says that Americans are the most death illiterate people in the world because they have no knowledge of it. And she says, and she wanted to know, how can we really find out about what people are thinking about when it comes to death? So she says, I decided to interview children, because children don't have filters, right? For those of you who have children, they really don't have filters. So you tell them something in the house, and then they go and you're like, oh my God, what? Like, that was not good, right? So she interviews children, and she starts collecting all of the questions that they had. And one of the questions one of the children was, if I die, will my cat eat my eyes out? That's where the title of the book comes from. Now, why I'm mentioning this is because when you think about the phenomena of death within the Sharia, that when someone dies, family members have to go and wash the body. This experience in and of itself is something that's deep, is something that's visceral. It's something that connects you with death unlike any other experience. For those of you who have washed bodies, you know what I'm talking about, right? When you think about slaughtering during Eid al-Adha, right, the dhibh, that's connecting you directly with death in a way that no other phenomena can. No lecture can tell you about that. So the Sharia is constantly pushing you towards a type of, engagement with the natural world. Okay, so my thesis, coming back to it, the greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. Okay, can I get a little philosophical? Because I know this is a Friday night lecture. You all seem very tired, but I need to kind of delve into a little bit of philosophy. Do I have your permission for that? Yes? I need some more yeses though, because I feel like there's like 3 people who are like, yes, let's do it, and everyone else is like, no, please, stop. Yes, please. Okay, next slide. Okay. Yep, there we go. So we want to ask a question now that's a little more philosophically orientated, and that is beauty part of our meta-language? Now, what do I mean by meta-language? Anytime you see the term meta, it's going to be referring to something. It literally means to go beyond, or the foundations of something, or the basis of something. So when we talk about metaphysics, you have the physical domain, and then you have the metaphysical, that which is beyond the physical, that which the physical rests upon. Okay? When we talk about metaethics, so ethics is about what's right and what's wrong. Okay? Should you do this or shouldn't you do this? What is correct and incorrect? Metaethics tells you why is it that you should do this. Is it because God says so? Is it because there's laws? What is the basis for that? Okay? When we talk about meta language, anything that's related to meta means you can't boil it down any further. There has to be something that everything rests upon. So ethics have to rest upon a meta-ethical basis. Physics or the physical world has to rest upon something that's metaphysical. For instance, God, consciousness. These are all metaphysical concepts. They're not part of the physical world. So meta-language is the same thing. You have certain terms that we use, which we call primary terms. And they are what we call descriptive. And then you have secondary evaluative terms. So evaluative terms are those things that give value to other terms. Okay? So for instance, if you have terms like generosity, humility, these are terms that are part of your descriptive domain. It's your primary terms. But now, if you want to say something about those terms, you have to use a secondary or evaluative terms, things that give that term value. So if you say humility is good, so good is the secondary term. Everyone with me? Right? Is that relatively clear? Okay? So you're not going to be, is good good? It's nonsense, right? You have to have some term that you can't take it any further, and that forms the basis of your language. All right? Next slide, please. So there is this concept of the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? The transcendentals, for those of you who have studied this before. And so what we say is beauty part of our meta-language? All right? So when we talk about truth, you say, do you believe in X? I believe in X because it's true. But you don't say, is true the truth? It doesn't make any sense, right? Like I said, you say, okay, humility is good, but is good good? No. So when you now look at, why do you look at Z? Why do you look at something? Because it's beautiful. Is beautiful beautiful? It doesn't make any sense. So in other words, there is some sort of grounding when it comes to our language as well. Okay? You can't go beyond that. You can't define things infinitely. All right. Like I said, this is a philosophical, I don't know what you want to call it. But everyone with me on this part? Okay. So, the next question, next slide please. Is beauty part of our fitrah? So we want to stop here and and this ties in with meta language, and I'll talk about this in just a second. When we talk about cognitive limits, remember, because we're talking about how do we establish truth, one of the things we have to ask is, do human beings have cognitive limits? Can you know everything? Can you prove anything? The issue is that if someone says that I won't believe what you're telling me until you rationally prove it. Okay? Do people here believe that? Like they don't want to believe anything until there's a rational proof for it? Okay, that seems like a good position. The problem is, if a person says, I won't believe what you tell me unless you rationally prove it to me, there's no end to that. Because you could ask for proof of the proof. And then once you give them proof, you could ask them proof of the proof of the proof. And this game would go on for how long? The problem with someone saying that I only believe things that are rational, right? So what I'm saying is most people think that their rationality has two categories, things that are rational and things that are irrational, right? So rational things are like I am Fahad, rational statement. I'll give you an irrational statement. I am a married bachelor. What do you guys think about that? Sure. Fair enough. All right. So I don't know if everyone heard that, but a married bachelor is problematic because by definition, someone who's married is not a bachelor, and by definition, someone who's a bachelor is not married. What if I was stubborn? I said, I don't care about you and your definitions. I am a married bachelor. How would you then now move on and say, okay, what am I supposed to do with this guy? That's fine. What if I said I'm okay with contradictions? Prove to me that you can't have two terms that are mutually exclusive, right? So if you were to now define this thing that we're talking about things that are mutually exclusive. Someone who's married can't be a bachelor, someone who's a bachelor who cannot be married. These are mutually exclusive, right? What if I said, prove to me the concept of mutual exclusivity? Why is the concept, why is the logical principle itself true, and I want you to prove it? Sure, prove the law. Oh, wait, what did you say? Okay, stop. That's exactly what I'm saying, is when you say it's axiomatic, what you're saying is it is self-evidently true. And that's exactly my point. You cannot prove things infinitely. You cannot say because this, forever. I'll give you a more practical example, okay? Because I think people are like, whoa, this is getting way too philosophical. You know, I have some children, and the second-born, and I don't know if you guys have experience with second-borns, but the second-born, he's, how should I call it? Animated. I guess that's the right way I can express it, right? So imagine now he comes in the kitchen one day, his name's Abdurrahman, right? So with all deference to anyone named Abdurrahman, I'm not talking about you. Unless you're second-born. No, I'm kidding. So Abdurrahman comes in the kitchen, and he starts to take out the knife from the cupboard. And I say, Abdurrahman, put the knife back. He says, Baba, why? I said, because it'll cut you. He says, why? I said, because it's sharp. He says, why? He says, well, because the manufacturer made it that way. He said, well, why? I said, well, because knives are constructed like that. He said, why? Well, because, they're used to cut things. Why? Well, because when you cut things like fruit, there's an easier way of eating it. Well, why? Now, at a certain point, my answer is going to be, because I'm your dad and I said so. Right? Khalas, that's it. You cannot ask why infinitely. There is no theorem, whether we're talking science or this or even Islam, there's no theorem that can be proven infinitely. You can't say because this, because this. Because every time you say why, you're saying, I doubt this, I need proof. Proof cannot work infinitely. All right? Is everyone clear with that? There has to be a stopping point. Like you mentioned, an axiom. Something that is self-evidently true. You know it for a fact, but you cannot prove it. So therefore, when we're talking about rationality is not limited to two categories. There's three categories. You have that which is rational, that which is irrational, and that which lies outside of rationality, which you may call the supra-rational. And in order for rationality to work, you must have a supra-rational. Those default positions that we take, right? For instance, logic. It's a default position. Okay, the existence of the real world, a default position. Try to go prove it to someone. All right? The past being real, default position. Go try to prove that to someone. Right? I'm going to prove to you the past. What happened 5 minutes ago? Let me prove it to you. Okay, Kaif. Like, how are you going to do it, man? Good luck. All right. So even AI still is built upon axioms, by the way. So there are three, in fact, categories. Someone that says that I will only accept things based upon rationality. This super rational things, these are for you religious people. You people that are, believe in God and things like that. I don't believe in these fairy tales. I only believe in rationality. Well, rationality is a great tool. I'm not saying we do away with rationality. That's not the point. What I'm saying is that, rationality, it is a great tool to use. It's much like when someone says that I have developed the perfect solvent. You guys know what a solvent is? Right? Like you pour it on something and it dissolves. He has the perfect solvent. It will dissolve anything. All right? Here's what you want to ask that person. What bottle will you keep it in? Right? Because you have to have at least one thing that is absolute. That which is not soluble. That which is not solvable. At least one thing that is absolute. So it might be the perfect solvent, but you still need a bottle to keep it in. Rationality might be a great tool, but you still need a bottle to keep it in. You still have to have that which lies outside of rationality, or what we call the supra-rational. All right. With all of that philosophical mumbo-jumbo, right, that some of you might be getting a bit like, okay, where are we going with this? Let's apply some Islamic terminology. Next slide, please. So when I talk about the supra-rational, this is what is housed in what we call the fitra, or al-fitra. Okay? Obviously, rationality is your aql, and that which is irrational is ghayr aqli, aw hakadha. Right? Now, the concept of the fitra, this is what houses logical principles. This is what houses concepts like how you perceive, the natural world. Like if my wife and I go and we see a sunset and I say, honey, that is a beautiful sunset. And she says to me, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Prove to me rationally, Yani, this is not a rational question. I'm not going to whip out a logical proposition for you to now like deconstruct or whatever, right? So the fitra holds within it logical principles, concepts of beauty, our perception of beauty, and other things, right? Certain smells. When you walk into a room now, let's say you walk into a room and you're like, wow, something stink. And your friend walks in and says, take it in, bro, it smells amazing. Prove to me rationally that it stinks. Now, what are you going to do? Bring him a logical proposition, deductive reasoning, premise A, premise B, therefore C, therefore it stinks. Right? No. Those are fitri concepts. The concept of cleanliness. Right? The fitra is what we call the original normative disposition. Your concept of what is normal and what is abnormal comes direct. And anyways, this is not a class on the fitra, but anyway. So moving on. So the question now about beauty, coming back to it. Beauty as part of the fitra. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay. So here's, for us to conceptualize beauty, I've stated Roger Scruton's platitudes. points that we want to understand about beauty. Number one, beauty is that phenomenon which pleases us. Okay? Number two, you can have one thing be more beautiful than another. Number three, beauty is always a reason for attending to the thing that possesses it. Number four, beauty is the subject matter of a judgment and the judgment of taste. Now, this particular point, number four, I am going to argue is only related to the domain of man-made beauty. Right? I would say beauty is subjective, or beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, therefore subjective. My argument is going to be that's only related to man-made beauty, things that we create, but it's not related to the natural world. But we'll come back to that. All right, number five, the judgment of taste is about the beautiful object, not about the subject's state of mind. And number six, nevertheless, there are no second-hand judgments of beauty. In other words, you can't convince someone of something that they are directly experiencing. You can't be like, no, you're not experiencing that. There's no second-hand judgments, all right? Everyone clear with these points? All right, next slide, please. So when we think about beauty, we have to understand that beauty has a connection with meaning. So we'll look at kind of aesthetic versus utilitarian interests. And up there, what I have is a dinner table that's been set up. Now, when you walk into let's say someone has invited you to dinner, and they have the dinner table set up like that, it actually has a type of meaning. Am I running out of time? 5 minutes? Okay, Isha, I guess I can let that go. All right. So, are we continuing after, or is khalas? Okay. So, beauty, okay, so what I was saying is when someone sets out a table, like a dinner table or something like that, when they set it up in a certain way, that has a certain meaning. Perhaps it means that the host values the ones that they've invited over, because they want them to feel the pleasure of the visual laying out of the table. Compare that to, right, so that's the aesthetic idea, right, that they want you to feel this pleasure. Maybe it says something about your host. Maybe it says that they care about you a little bit more, or whatever it might be. As opposed to going to someone's house and they say, look, the paper plates are there, paper spoons are there, and, we need to eat this fast and get out of here, right? That's a utilitarian interest. So the fact that there was an effort in presenting the beauty and how it's presented reflects a type of meaning that's connected to how it's set up. All right, next slide. All right. This is also true when we look at, and this is a bit controversial, because I did this talk once and someone came up to me and hammered me for it, arts versus entertainment, or art versus entertainment. So when you think about, entertainment, what you find is it is something relatively fleeting. It's something that's, that you're just there for a certain sensation. By and large, art, on the other hand, is something that has a deeper connection, because there's something involved in the painter, or the one that did the photograph, or the one that put the video together, or whatever it might be, whereas film and entertainment is a different dynamic. All right, next slide, please. All right, this will be my last point, and then we'll have to break for Isha, inshallah. Prose versus poetry. I think this one is very, very powerful, especially when we bring it into the domain of the Quran. Because the difference between prose and poetry is related to beauty, and perhaps beauty alone. Why? Because what is prose? Prose is those words that have been put together to give you some information. Like I have up there organic chemistry textbook. Okay? When you have this organic chemistry textbook, you will probably read it once to take your exam, and then you will never look at it again. Okay? As opposed to poetry. Because poetry is not just about content. In fact, the content might take second stage, or might be secondary. What's primary in poetry is how the poet brings words together to give you a sense of perceiving beauty. Like, so for instance, this particular poem by Emily Dickinson, right? She writes, "Hope is the thing with feathers. It perches in the soul." And actually, hold on a second. All right. I've lost it. Anyway. All right, so I'm going to just, I guess I can try to read it from there. All right, hope is the thing with feathers. It perches in the soul and sings, what's that word up there? A tune. Actually, someone want to read it for me? Because I can't really see. I can't read it. Who's got eyes good enough to read that really quickly? Nobody. All right. Yep. So, for those of you that heard it, that what you get from the poem itself is an element of beauty. And this is true when it comes to poetry by and large, is that the added element has to do with beauty. And it's not just the fact that it's talking about something, let's say, non-tangible, hope or whatever it might be, the fact that she makes it into a bird and they have the chilliest nights, you're actually feeling it in the sense. And that feeling, as if you are now there, that hope is like this little bird, it's actually very beautiful, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we come back. I need to stop here because of Isha. So, inshallah, I have a few more slides and then we'll conclude, and then hopefully you will walk out of here with saying that my thesis is true, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamualaikum. If we can get some volunteers to move the divider back in, please. Jazakallahu khair.
ऐसे नहीं करना है ऑलरेडी डन ऑन ऐसे करके सकर लोग डरा जाता है फिर भी भले मत करो फिर भी अच्छा बुरा है
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة آت محمد والفضيلة والدرجة وابعث مقاما محمود الذي وعدته